In the cold and unforgiving north, where winter reigns and the forests whisper with ancient spirits, a brotherhood of warrior monks rose to power. They were bound by vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience. Yet their swords brought fire and conquest. They called themselves the Order of the Teutonic Knights. Born in the Holy Land during the Crusades, they carried their mission not to Jerusalem, but to the shores of the Baltic Sea. There, among pagan tribes and icy rivers, they carved out an empire. Their castles of brick and stone still stand, monuments to an age of faith and steel. This is their story. A story of healers turned conquerors, of monks turned kings. The story of the warriors of the north. It was the year 1190. The Third Crusade raged across the Holy Land. At the port city of Acre, German pilgrims and crusaders fought and bled alongside kings. Amid the slaughter, a small group of Germans established a hospital, dedicated to the care of the sick and the wounded. It was here that the seeds of the Teutonic Order were planted. What began as a humble hospice for the weary would soon become one of the most formidable military orders of Christendom. In 1192, Pope Celestine III formally recognized the German hospital in Acre. Within a few years, Pope Innocent III granted them military privileges, transforming healers into warriors. The new order would carry both sword and cross, defending pilgrims while spreading the faith. They wore white cloaks marked with a black cross. They spoke the language of the German lands. And unlike the Templars and Hospitallers, their destiny would not be tied to Jerusalem, but to the northern frontiers of Christendom. The Teutonic Knights swore the same vows as monks: poverty, chastity, obedience. Their days were divided by prayer, labor, and combat training. At dawn, they rose for matins, chanting psalms in the cold. They ate simple meals of bread and broth. They slept in communal halls, their armor always near. No laughter was allowed, no idle chatter. Yet when called to war, they rode as armored knights, disciplined and relentless. Though small in number, the Teutonic Knights joined in campaigns against Muslim forces. They defended Acre, escorted pilgrims, and served alongside the Templars and Hospitallers. But in the crowded world of the Crusader states, there was little room for another military order. The Teutonic Knights would soon seek a new frontier, a land where pagans still resisted baptism, where an empire of their own could be forged. In the early 13th century, far from the Holy Land, the pagan tribes of Prussia and the Baltic resisted conversion to Christianity. Their lands were dense with forests, rivers, and sacred groves, untouched by Rome. Duke Conrad of Masovia, a Polish ruler desperate to defend his borders, invited the Teutonic Knights to fight these pagan tribes. In 1226, Emperor Frederick II granted the knights the Golden Bull of Rimini, giving them sovereign rights over any lands they could conquer and convert. The order accepted. Their future lay not in Jerusalem, but in the frozen north. In 1230, the first Teutonic contingents arrived in Prussia. What awaited them was no holy city, but endless woodland. The tribes they faced, the Prussians, the Samogitians, the Lithuanians, were fierce, proud, and deeply tied to their ancestral gods. They fought not as feudal armies, but as clans, using ambushes, swift raids, and the forests themselves as allies. For the knights, this was no pilgrimage. It was total war. The Teutonic Knights understood that victory in the north would not come from one battle. It would come from stone. They built castles, hundreds of them. First in wood, then in brick and stone, towering over rivers and roads. Each castle became a fortress, an administrative center, and a base for missionary priests. From these strongholds, the knights could project their power deep into pagan territory. The greatest of these castles would one day be Marienburg, Malbork, a citadel so vast it would become the largest brick fortress in the world. For nearly a century, the Teutonic Knights waged war on the pagan tribes. Their campaigns were ruthless. Villages were burned, sacred groves cut down, and entire clans forced to accept baptism at the point of a sword. The Prussians resisted fiercely, launching uprisings in 1242 and again in 1260. These rebellions were crushed with fire and steel. Slowly, the native peoples were subdued. Many were killed. Others were absorbed into the new Christian order. By the late 13th century, Prussia was no longer pagan. It was Teutonic. The Teutonic Order had built not just a crusading force, but a state. They governed with German law. They established towns like Königsberg, Elbing, and Tarunja. They taxed, traded, and judged. The order was at once a religious brotherhood and a government, both monks and kings. By 1309, the Grand Master moved his headquarters from Venice to Marienburg. From there, the knights ruled a realm stretching from the Vistula to the Baltic Sea, a crusader kingdom in the heart of Europe. In 1309, the Teutonic Order moved its headquarters from Venice to the banks of the river Noget in Prussia. Here they built Marienburg, Malbork Castle. It was more than a fortress. It was a statement of power. Its towers soared above the surrounding plains, its walls enclosed chapels, armories, and vast refectories. Within its halls, the Grand Master presided not as a pilgrim knight, but as a sovereign ruler. Marienburg was not just the largest castle of its age, it was the beating heart of a state ruled by monks of war. The Teutonic Order was organized with precision. At its head stood the Grand Master, elected for life, answerable only to the Pope. Beneath him, provincial commanders, called landmeisters, ruled regions of the Order's territory. Local commanders, the counters, managed castles, collected taxes, and oversaw both military campaigns and the daily lives of the brothers. Discipline remained strict. Brothers lived in communal quarters, dined together in silence, and rose to prayer before dawn. Yet, they also commanded armies, led diplomacy, and governed with iron authority. With conquest came wealth. The Order controlled fertile lands along the Vistula and Baltic coasts. Grain, timber, and amber were shipped to distant markets through their alliance with the Hanseatic League. The ports of Danzig, Elbing, and Königsberg became gateways of trade. Every ship that passed paid tolls. Every merchant who traded paid taxes. The Teutonic Knights had become not only crusaders, but landlords, traders, and kings of commerce. Despite their growing wealth, the daily lives of the brothers remained bound by their rule. Meals were simple: bread, fish, and soup. Wine was rare, conversation forbidden. At night they slept in dormitories, armor close at hand, weapons always ready. Each day was divided: prayer, administrative duties, military drills, and patrols. Their vows bound them, but their power tempted them. For many, the Order was no longer a path of pure devotion, but of prestige and authority. But even at the height of their power, enemies encircled the Order. To the west stood the Kingdom of Poland, resentful of Teutonic control over Pomerelia and Danzig. To the east, the Lithuanians, the last great pagan power of Europe, fought fiercely against Christian encroachment. The Order claimed its wars were holy crusades. But to its neighbors, they looked less like warriors of Christ and more like conquerors hungry for land. The Lithuanians were unlike any enemy the Teutonic Knights had faced. Masters of guerrilla warfare, they struck swiftly, disappearing into forests and marshes. The Knights, armored and disciplined, struggled against this elusive foe. Battles dragged on for decades. Border raids left villages in flames. The conflict was not only military, it was spiritual. The Teutonic Order declared Lithuania's defiance a rejection of Christ himself. But to the Lithuanians, it was the defense of their freedom, their land, and their gods. By the late 14th century, the Teutonic Order had reached the height of its power. Their castles towered across Prussia. Their fleets sailed the Baltic. Their armies were feared from the Vistula to the Niemen. Envoys from across Europe visited Marienburg. Pilgrims flocked to its chapels. Merchants sought its markets. The order had become a state within Christendom, one that answered to no king, but only to the Pope. Yet within this power lay the seeds of decline. The Teutonic Knights had been founded to defend pilgrims and convert pagans. But now, their purpose blurred. They were warriors without a crusade, rulers without restraint. And soon, their greatest enemies would unite. Poland and Lithuania, once divided, would stand together. The stage was set for one of the largest battles in medieval history, the day when the Teutonic Knights' power would shatter. In 1386, the political map of Europe shifted forever. Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania, the last great pagan ruler of Europe, converted to Christianity and married Queen Jadwiga of Poland. Taking the name the Ladisław to Jogaila, he united Poland and Lithuania into a single kingdom. For the Teutonic Order, this was a disaster. Their holy mission, the justification for decades of crusade, was gone. Lithuania was now Christian. Yet the Knights refused to recognize the conversion. They declared it false, a mere political trick. But deep down, they knew the crusade had lost its purpose. The Teutonic Knights launched a campaign of propaganda across Europe. They claimed the Lithuanians still worshipped their old gods in secret, that their baptism was a lie. They sought to rally Christendom to their side, to frame Poland and Lithuania as heretics. But the truth was clear. This was no longer a holy war. It was a war for power, land, and survival. In 1409, war erupted. Lithuanian forces raided Teutonic lands. The order responded with fire and steel. Villages burned, castles fell, and thousands fled in terror. The conflict spiraled into open war. On one side, the Teutonic Knights, wealthy, disciplined, and armed with Europe's finest heavy cavalry. On the other, the united might of Poland and Lithuania, a kingdom vast, populous, and determined to end the order's dominion. In the summer of 1410, both sides prepared for a decisive clash. From the west, King Jogaila of Poland led his armies, noble cavalry, infantry, and crossbowmen. From the east, Grand Duke Vytautas of Lithuania brought his swift horsemen, masters of steppe warfare. The Teutonic Knights, under Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, gathered their forces, armored knights, mercenaries from across Europe, and disciplined infantry. Tens of thousands converged on the plains of Grunwald. The fate of Prussia would be decided in a single day. July 15, 1410. The sun rose over the fields of Grunwald. The Teutonic Order's banners, black crosses on white, stood against the red and white of Poland and the columns of Lithuanian horsemen. Grand Master Ulrich sent envoys to King Jogaila with 2 swords, mocking him, urging him to fight. Jogaila accepted, his army ready. The largest battle of the Middle Ages was about to begin. The battle opened with the charge of the Lithuanians. Lightly armed, swift, they struck the Teutonic lines, but the armored wall of the knights held firm. The clash was brutal. Horses fell, steel shattered, men screamed in the chaos. For hours, the Lithuanians fought desperately. Then, suddenly, their lines broke. The Lithuanian cavalry turned and fled. The Teutonic Knights roared in triumph, believing victory was at hand. But it was no rout. It was a ruse. The Lithuanian cavalry, led by Grand Duke Vytautas, feigned retreat, drawing the Teutonic Knights away from the battlefield. When they returned, the Polish line stood firm. The battle was far from over. The Polish forces advanced. Cavalry met cavalry in a storm of steel. Infantry clashed with axes and spears. The Teutonic Knights fought with legendary discipline, but their enemies outnumbered them. Slowly, their lines began to falter. Still, Grand Master Ulrich pressed forward, leading from the front, refusing to yield. In the chaos of battle, Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen was struck down. The symbol of Teutonic power lay dead in the mud of Grunwald. With his fall, the Order's courage broke. Their lines collapsed. What began as triumph ended as slaughter. The Battle of Grunwald was one of the bloodiest clashes of the Middle Ages. Thousands lay dead. The Teutonic army was shattered, its leadership destroyed. The myth of Teutonic invincibility was broken forever. After Grunwald, the victors marched on Marienburg, seeking to end the Order once and for all. But the castle held. Its walls resisted, its defenders fought with desperation. Though crippled, the Teutonic Order survived. But it would never again be what it once was. The road from Grunwald led only downward. The Teutonic Knights had reached their zenith and fallen. What followed was decline, a slow unraveling of their power, their purpose, and their very identity.
After the devastation at Grunwald in 1410, the Teutonic Order staggered but did not fall. Their fortress of Marienburg, the largest brick castle in the world, became both shield and prison. Though the knights survived, their aura of invincibility was gone. Once the hammer of God, they were now but a wounded brotherhood, clinging to stone walls and fading glory. In 1411, the Peace of Thorn was signed. The knights retained their core territories, but at a heavy cost. They were forced to pay enormous reparations to Poland and Lithuania. To meet these demands, the Order taxed their subjects ruthlessly. But instead of loyalty, they bred resentment. The seeds of rebellion were sown. As the 15th century wore on, cracks deepened. The Order faced endless wars with Poland, uprisings among their subjects, and the rising power of cities like Danzig, which resented Teutonic rule. The once disciplined brotherhood was now consumed by debt, internal quarrels, and corruption. Their castles stood firm, but their unity was crumbling. In 1454, the Prussian Confederation, an alliance of cities and nobles under Teutonic rule, rose in rebellion. They appealed to the Polish king, who gladly accepted their cause. The 13 Years' War had begun. It was not only knights against knights, but burghers, peasants, and mercenaries. Gunpowder thundered across the fields, heralding a new age of warfare. In 1466, the war ended with the Second Peace of Thorn. The Teutonic Order lost half its lands, including their most prosperous cities and the vital port of Danzig. Western Prussia became part of Poland. The knights were reduced to vassals, forced to swear loyalty to the Polish crown. For the first time, the Order of the Teutonic Knights was no longer sovereign. As the 16th century dawned, a new storm swept across Europe, the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church shook Christendom to its core. For the Teutonic Order, already weakened and dependent on Poland, it was a death blow. Many of their subjects embraced Lutheranism. Even among the knights, doubts spread. Their vows of celibacy, their crusading mission, their loyalty to Rome, all seemed relics of a fading world. The man who would end the Teutonic Knight state was Grand Master Albrecht of Brandenburg-Ansbach. Young, ambitious, and pragmatic, Albrecht realized the order could not survive as it was. Seeking counsel from Martin Luther himself, he embraced the Reformation. In 1525, Albrecht took a radical step. He dissolved the Teutonic Order in Prussia, renounced his vows, married, and became Duke of Prussia under the suzerainty of the Polish crown. On April 10, 1525, in Krakow, Albrecht knelt before King Sigismund of Poland. The proud Grand Master of the Teutonic Knights became the first Duke of secular Prussia. What had once been a crusading brotherhood of warrior monks was now a Lutheran duchy. The Black Cross of the Teutonic Knights no longer flew over Prussia. The Teutonic Order state was gone, but the order itself did not vanish. Stripped of lands and power, it retreated into the Holy Roman Empire, surviving as a charitable and religious institution. The age of the Crusading Knights had ended. The age of nations had begun. The Teutonic Knights had once dreamed of building God's kingdom in the north. They built castles, forged laws, spread faith, and left behind both glory and ruin. Their swords are silent, but their legacy still echoes in the stones of ruined fortresses, in the memory of nations, and in the history of Europe itself. Though their state in Prussia was lost, the Teutonic Order did not vanish. In the Holy Roman Empire, they found refuge. From Vienna, they continued as a religious and charitable brotherhood, stripped of their armies but still bound by their vows. Their mission was no longer conquest, but service, tending the poor, the sick, and the faithful. Yet the memory of the Teutonic Knights lingered. For some, they were heroes, defenders of Christendom, bringers of law, faith, and civilization to the wild north. For others, they were conquerors, foreign overlords who crushed native peoples and burned sacred traditions in the name of God. Their legacy was both light and shadow, pride and wound. The duchy founded by Albrecht of Brandenburg grew in power. In time, it became the Kingdom of Prussia, and then the heart of the German Empire. The Iron Cross, Germany's symbol of military honor, was inspired by the Black Cross of the Teutonic Order. The shadow of the medieval brotherhood stretched far into modern times. In the 20th century, the symbols of the Teutonic Knights were misused by those who sought to cloak conquest in the mantle of history. The Black Cross, once the sign of a crusading order, became entangled in the wars of modern Europe. But the true Teutonic Order, by then a small Catholic charity, remained apart, its ancient mission of service unchanged. Today, the Teutonic Order survives, not as warriors, but as servants of faith. Numbering only a few hundred, they dedicate themselves to hospitals, schools, and missions. Their Black Cross still endures, but its meaning has changed. From blood and iron, to charity and faith. The castles of the Teutonic Knights still stand, Malbork, Königsberg, Tarunia, silent witnesses to a vanished world. They are no longer fortresses of war, but monuments of memory. Their walls speak of crusade and conquest, of faith and ambition, of triumph and downfall. The Teutonic Knights are gone, but their story remains, etched in stone, written in chronicles, and remembered in legend. They called themselves the Knights of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem. Crusaders, conquerors, rulers, and servants. Warriors of the North. Their age has passed, but their legacy still shapes the story of Europe.